What is something that everyone accepts as normal that scares you? The whole system of credit/credit scores makes my blood boil. It's virtually impossible to exist without a credit score, which you can't get if you don't go into debt. I lived completely debt-free until I was 24, no credit cards, no student loans, worked full-time in college, and finally caved when I couldn't get an apartment on my own because my lack of a credit score showed I had no fiscal responsibility. Fuck that. Edit. To everyone lecturing me about how to use a credit card, thanks but I'm good. I'm 28 and just graduated from law school with no student loans. My credit score is in the 780s and I know perfectly well how to utilize a credit card to maximize benefits in my credit score. I just think the whole system of having to take on debt, even just for a couple of weeks, to prove that you're financially competent is kind of ridiculous. Just because you have credit cards doesn't mean you have to go in debt. I have really good credit, like 60K in credit, and I don't owe a penny on them, and I've never paid a penny of interest. There's literally nothing keeping people from treating credit cards like debit cards. Lots of people are car, house and credit card poor. They have decent jobs but just spend beyond their means. I'm way more sympathetic to people who bust their balls at low-paying jobs and go into debt than people who have every financial means to make it work and still go into the red. I've seen my coworkers do some of the stupidest shit, like finance their dream vacation on a 25% April card or roll 2 years of negative equity and depreciation on a 6-year loan into a new even bigger one. Dude, American slavery was so weird and stupid. Like, that's pretty obvious that it was stupid and horrible. But the whole they were fighting for state rights is a load of bullshit. And I'm not speaking from an emotional or political or social standpoint. I'm talking straight objective proof. Everyone needs to look up the story of the Confederate General Patrick Cleburne. This dude was a badass, first of all, dubbed the Stonewall of the West. But he is objective proof, of many things, that it was about slavery for the people in charge. I will concede that it was absolutely about state rights for a lot of the soldiers and citizens. But for the leaders, it was mostly about slavery. Cleburne believed it was about state rights, and he was sympathetic to that cause because he fought for the same thing in Ireland where he was from. He proposed that the slaves be freed and enlisted in the Confederate Army. Long story short, they shut him down even though it was something that could have very well given them a huge edge, but maybe not. There are way too many variables to discuss in this post. Then they sent him on impossible suicide missions, many of which he actually overcame and succeeded, until he was eventually killed. There are so many crazy stories from the Civil War that are never talked about much. There are books on them, but they aren't taught in school. I only found out about him because of researching unrelated stuff on the Civil War, and I ended up switching my topic to this guy and what he tried to do. If they did his plan, I wonder how things would have played out. I haven't done enough research to have an educated guess. I only did enough to get an A on my research paper. Actually, it gets even worse. Southern states weren't fighting for states' rights. They weren't even just fighting to keep legal slavery in their states for their own benefit. They were fighting to forcibly make slavery legal in every state and to stop the importation of slaves from Africa. The reason for the former was that if slaves knew that the North was free, they would always want to escape there, so forcing the legality of slave labor in every state eliminated that problem. The reason for halting importation was simple: slave owners in the South owned all the slaves. Making slavery legal in the North would mean people there would want slaves too, and by halting importation of slaves, the Southern slave owners would be in control of supply. Basically, they wanted to not just keep their slaves but enrich themselves even further. I mean, you need look no further than the fact that most seceding states directly mentioned white supremacy or slavery as the cause for leaving the Union in their Articles of Secession, and slavery was codified in most of their state constitutions. The only people who still claim it was about some nebulous idea of states' rights are either revisionists or plainly ignorant. Because information about you can be used against you. From the burglars who check the obits to decide where to break into, to con artists looking to craft an appropriate scam. Get a windfall? Paints a target on you. Link to a friend on Facebook? A picture they have of you keeps you from getting a job. Mention your first pet's name on Facebook? Hope it wasn't a security question. The less about you that's out, the less ammo there is to be used against you. The government that decides your DNA sequence is too costly, or demographic is a statistical dead end, so collective resources shouldn't be shared. To the corporation with actuarials determining if your life is worth living or not and reselling the data, including insurance carriers. to the mid-size multinationals determining you and your family's life events based on consumer purchases, and emailing you advertisements. Such as your dad, after you made a purchase at the corner of a pregnancy test. Based on your family profile, advertisements on newborns is sent to your dad. However, you had an abortion. This really happened. Fuck the fear of petty criminals. The terror lies in the everyday normalized use of surveillance. Yes. And all the plastic useless/single-use shit filling the stores all the time. All the poorly made soon-to-fall-apart crap at the dollar store. Those trinkets every chain store has on hand for the person that's impossible to buy for, or token gifts for people you barely know that they will never use. Who pulls out a tic-tac-toe game set? Or novelty beer glasses? Star Wars Pez dispensers because the only thing you know your step-cousin-in-law likes is Star Wars and you're on a budget. Millions of new Christmas decorations because consumerism has convinced people your tree can't have the same look every year. Gotta change that shit up. Why not have 2 Christmas trees? None of that shit is essential. And all of it arrives in the store in plastic packaging, and possibly leaves the store in a plastic bag. This world is sick. And it's seen as completely normal. I walk through the store at times and think about how much of the plastic is just completely unnecessary. You don't really notice it if you're not thinking about it too much, because it's so normalized to you. Instead, walk through and actively pay attention to how much plastic is on each and every product, and it'll boggle your mind. Also, the amount of perishable, completely edible, delicious food that likely won't get sold out and just wasted to a landfill. Maybe even composted, if it's lucky. I'm so sorry you have to deal with this. Perhaps the story I just posted above will be of help. They are very careful to make sure you are ready, and will leave without a word if you change your mind. You can pass at home or at a friend's or relative's as my aunt did. And 4 is set up, and an injection into it puts you gently to sleep. Once there, another slows your heart to a stop. And you are gone to whatever rest you believe in. I sincerely hope you turn out to be looking at something else, Kit, but should the time ever come when you are helpless and getting nothing from life but pain, you may be very glad to have set down your wishes, and made arrangements, earlier. My aunt's eldest son told us she went easily and calmly, and knowing that option is there gives me reassurance that should I be in her place one day, I, too, can step peacefully into the night. For what it's worth. Take care. My last aunt had a goodbye party at her brother's place a couple of years ago. Her sons and daughters, her nieces and nephews, her friends from years gone by, all gathered, many from hundreds of miles away. Her husband had died many years previously, and she lived with constant weakness and pain and no outlook for improvement. Yet the scene was all very upbeat and people were renewing acquaintances all over the place. She was ensconced in a plush chair in the front room, and people were taking their own few minutes with her in turn. When I sat down by her, she assured me she was going to a better place, without pain, and told me not to be sad. I was good. I played to her faith and asked her to say hello to my uncle for me. And you, Mom and Dad. She added. I told her I understood why she wanted to go when she was still well enough to enjoy the wonderful gathering, hugged her, and wished her a happy journey. Then I turned and the tears came. The next evening, as my friend, who had known her well and was at the goodbye, were driving along the seashore and noticed a gorgeous sunset forming. We pulled aside and realized it was about the time a nurse, with witness at hand, would putting my aunt to sleep one last time. It seemed like a lovely send-off. As hard as it was, I knew she would never lie in pain, unable to speak, in a hospital bed, praying for death to come soon, as others I have known did. That is what I cannot accept as normal. For our first child, the placenta ripped away from the uterus and my wife almost bled to death. It was incredibly lucky that we went to the hospital. He was about a week late. She woke up in the middle of the night and thought her water broke. So we went to the hospital. They do all the check-in stuff which seemed to take forever. When she finally got into the room with the nurses, they had her go into the bathroom and change into the grown thing. My wife called out to them asking if there should be blood. The nurse said some blood was normal. And my wife said, "What constitutes some?" The nurse went into the bathroom and when she came out her face was white. Within 15 minutes the kid was out of her, via C-section, and they were giving her blood. She was in surgery for the next 2 hours. Most stressful 2 hours of my life. There I was with my beautiful baby boy and left wondering if my wife was going to die. Then not even 2 years later she's like, "Yeah, let's do this again." One of my biggest fears, and unfortunately I want a kid. I have a big medical phobia, and hearing about all the times women's pain and well-being is ignored during pregnancy and labor is horrifying. So many stories about anesthetic not working during C-sections, hospitals letting people dilate past the point an epidural can be used, stitching up vaginas without anesthetic, etc. It's absolutely fucked what is normalized in the birth process. Compared to getting into a contraption that also runs on a dangerous, highly flammable liquid, driving through a whole bunch of other people who don't care about the rules of the road over a long distance, such that you'll get tired and less likely to notice some idiot's stunt until too late. Please, at least finish passing me before starting to swing over in front of me. There's little traffic surrounding your plane except at takeoff and landing. The speed means it's spending less time in transit, so less chance for something to go wrong. Unlike cars, the plane is being re-examined between every flight. The pilots are held to far higher standards than normal drivers. Flight has risks, but there's far more mitigation compared to cars. And that's leaving out big cities and the tendency for traffic to go from 70, or higher, to 0 for wrecks or construction, then floor it once past the scene despite a sign saying there's another wreck in a mile.